Hello everyone, and welcome to this event focusing on transforming tourism for a resilient and sustainable post-COVID world. My name is Marika Palosaari. I work as the program coordinator at the Europe office of the United Nations Environment Programme, and I'm the moderator of this event today. Before we get started with our program today, I have a few brief announcements. Simultaneous English to Russian interpretation is available throughout the event, and you can access your choice of language by using the selection at the bottom left corner of the screen. My colleague Jaroslav Bulic will say the same in Russian.
Спасибо, Марика. Уважаемые участники онлайн-мероприятия, если вы хотите слушать русский перевод, пожалуйста, переключитесь, то есть обратите внимание, в нижнем левом углу написано есть надпись Language Selector. Если вы нажмете на Floor, и потом можете выбрать или русский, или английский язык. Спасибо.
Thank you, Jaroslav. So now I hope the interpretation works for everyone and we can continue. I hope everyone has been able to switch to their choice of language. Another brief announcement is that please do note that the webinar will be recorded. The recording and all the other materials that we share during this session will be made available to all participants after the event. So during this event, as you know, our purpose is to discuss the role of tourism in building a more resilient and sustainable post-COVID world. This event is organized by the UN Environment Programme in collaboration with the UN Economic Commission for Europe and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This event is part of the 26th meeting of the Committee on Environmental Policy, which covers the pan-European region. As such, our discussion will focus mostly on the situation, challenges, and opportunities in the wider European region. We will first hear a brief introduction about this challenge from Mr. Bruno Pozzi, who is the director at the Europe office of the UN Environment Programme. We will then receive a presentation from Dr. Anna Spenceley. She is the chair of the IUCN Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group. After that, we will be joined by 5 experts who will analyze how the recovery activities could be aligned with a transition that meets health and safety requirements, leads to an inclusive circular economy, and helps to achieve the climate commitments. After we have listened to our speakers, there will be a question and answer session. So I invite you all to type any questions that you may have in the messaging box, which you can open from the top right corner. We will reply some of the questions during the session, and then we will, throughout the webinar, monitor your questions and make a selection of them, which we will answer during the question and answer session. Now, I would like to give the floor to Bruno Pozzi for his opening remarks. Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Marika, and I hope that you can all hear me well. I really would like to warmly welcome you to this webinar, which is a side event of the 26th meeting of the UNECE Committee on Environmental Policy, which is held today and tomorrow. And I'm delighted to see so many participants online. And really thanks for this. Earlier today, the committee discussed the plans for organizing the next Environment for Europe Ministerial Conference, and the conference will be held from 5th to 7th of October 2022 and will focus on 2 topics: sustainable infrastructure and sustainable tourism. In the lead up to the conference, UNEP, UNECE, OECD and other partners will facilitate policy dialogues between countries and with countries towards commitments and actions on sustainable infrastructure and sustainable tourism. These 2 topics are essential to sustainable consumption and production, and UNEP, as the custodian agency of SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production, tries to develop, promote, and scaling up policies and practices that will boost the efficient use of natural resources, will produce less waste, and will address the challenges of climate change and biodiversity. Changing the way we consume and the way we produce is at the heart of resolving the triple planetary crisis that we're facing: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And these crises have been caused by our way of life. Tourism can play a key role in the transition towards greener economies, more resilient businesses and communities that will look at innovation, circularity, digitalization, sustainability, and partnership. In a world that continues to use natural resources in an unsustainable way, the COVID-19 crisis is in fact an opportunity to develop tourism policies and practices that will promote resource and energy efficient production and consumption, sustainable infrastructure, and will create green and decent jobs. With its high climate and environmental footprint, the growth of tourism over recent years has been criticized because it puts the climate target of the Paris Agreement at risk. It's true that transport-related greenhouse gas emissions from tourism are around 5% of all human-originated emissions, and they could rebound sharply if the recovery of the sector is not aligned with the climate goals. At the same time, the COVID-19 health response has increased waste generation and water use, creating additional pressure in popular touristic destinations where waste and water systems are already under significant stress. But since decades as well, tourism has helped to conserve nature and protect endangered species. And there, the pandemic and the closure of natural protected areas has had a destructive impact on communities that are responsible for these areas. So we need to plan the recovery, and we need to plan the investment to support tourism recovery. This is critical in building a new tourism model which will be based on sustainability, capturing opportunities for biodiversity conservation, climate action, and circular economy. The financial investment should support sustainable tourism infrastructure and retrofitting, which is aimed at decarbonization and banning unsustainable polluting practices. In the past month, we've seen already some very promising examples of promotion of sustainable recovery in the tourism sector. The Czech Republic, for example, has given priority to restart its tourism sector in a sustainable way. In Finland, the Arctic destination of Lapland is investing in new ecological resorts, which are based on sustainability, authenticity, and locality. By strengthening the connection between the tourists, the local culture, and the nature, we can deepen the visitors' understanding of how various global issues such as climate change are in fact reflected in both nature and the lives of local people. And as such, tourism can become a powerful tool in changing the lifestyle of people towards more sustainability. UNEP, with its partners, will support countries in these transitions. This includes the knowledge sharing and networking activities of the One Planet Network. But we will also carry out an assessment on the environmental impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector. The assessment will identify opportunities for sustainable tourism and compile case studies for innovative approaches. This work is part of the Go for SDGs initiative, which is supported by Germany, and which aims to accelerate the shift to more inclusive green economies and sustainable production and consumption by sharing innovative practices and strengthening capacities for application of these best practices. With these short words, I welcome you once again, and we will explore how sustainable tourism can help to build forward better towards more sustainable and resilient societies. And I hope that you will find these discussions encouraging and that we will move forward together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you very much for these opening remarks that provided some context also for the political discussions following this meeting. Now, I would like to invite you all to follow Dr. Anna Spenceley's presentation, which will set the scene for the discussion today.
Hello, my name is Anna Spenceley, and it's a pleasure to be joining you today at this online event. I've been working on sustainable tourism issues for the past 2 decades, and this year I've been focusing on assignments that analyze the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector and its implications for conservation, livelihoods, and sustainability. Today, I'd like to share some of what I've learned to help set the scene for this session. These are the 3 topics I'll speak about, starting with tourism as we once knew it. Before the pandemic, we were trying to integrate the sustainability agenda into tourism, as this dashboard from 2016 illustrates. Many destinations, organizations, and individuals had made valiant efforts to promote it. We have certification systems applying the global sustainable tourism criteria, international awards profiling exemplary practices, and booking platforms that highlight good actors. But in reality, we've struggled to mainstream sustainable tourism practices and have inadvertently contributed to global crises. Although there are notable exceptions, in general, we haven't fully managed to embed it across the government policies, within protected area management, in the business practices of operators, or in the mindsets of travelers. For examples, we've had challenges of over-tourism and overcrowding in popular tourism destinations and in environmentally sensitive areas, and visitor infrastructure has encroached on natural habitats. We know from the Living Planet report that nature is really struggling. On average, we lost 68% of our populations of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish between 1970 and 2016. We have challenges with pollution, and particularly the use and disposal of single-use plastic. And of course, we have the existential climate crisis that travel contributes to. The tourism sector has a high climate and environmental footprint, requiring heavy energy and fuel consumption and placing stress on land systems. A development model focusing on numbers of arrivals and economic growth no longer seems viable if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's how things were, and now we have the coronavirus pandemic too. By now, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the maps from the World Health Organization illustrating the distribution of the virus. And the pandemic has had a global impact on the travel sector in particular, including across Europe. The UNWTO reported that between January and May, 100% of global destinations had imposed travel restrictions, and 45% had totally or partially closed their borders for tourists. And this inevitably impacted on the number of international tourism arrivals. There have been literally hundreds of media releases and research articles about how the pandemic is affecting pollution, conservation, business, and livelihoods in Europe and globally. There have been numerous reports of wildlife reclaiming areas that are now bereft of people and vehicles, making us rethink whether we had the conditions for sustainable tourism right in the first place. For example, in Asia, people are saying it's the perfect time to reassess what can be improved in elephant conservation and how the captive population can be better supported for the guaranteed future of all the Asian elephants. Protected areas have been closed in many countries, and this is having a major impact on cash flow, where nature-based tourism had been a key revenue generator for conservation and anti-poaching budgets, and also in gateway communities. And the impacts of the virus on tourism destinations in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals are also complex and varied. So we need to think really carefully about our recovery and how we can build back greener and more sustainably. Recognizing our previous challenges with nature, pollution, and climate, many webinars, such as this one, and discussion pieces this year have focused on creating a better way forward for the planet and for us all. The UN Secretary General has emphasized rebuilding tourism in a safe, equitable, and climate-friendly way, promoting 5 priority areas for action. Bolstering this, market research makes it clear that there's a drive towards sustainability and to visit natural areas. For example, TripAdvisor's analysis of their online search data indicates that natural destinations are early beneficiaries of demand. They suggest that destinations should initially promote domestic travel, options for social distancing, cleanliness, and to help customers relax again. Other market intelligence suggests that traveller priorities will include sustainability in addition to their health, social well-being, and contributions to local economies during recovery and resilience periods. By September, travel restrictions had eased in 53% of destinations, and travel was cautiously re-emerging. UNWTO suggests different scenarios for the recovery of international tourism, based on differing timeframes for opening national borders and lifting travel restrictions. However, they predict that a return to 2019 levels may take between 2.5 and 4 years. And recovery of the industry will also be hampered by the damage that has been done, including decline in airline routes, cruises, workforce reductions, and company insolvencies. As lockdowns are lifted, local people are rediscovering the joy of their own spaces. And protected areas that were closed have begun to reopen. Some are opening gradually for different types of tourism activity that accounts for COVID conditions. But the resurgence in domestic tourism to natural and cultural sites has also had challenges, particularly where protected area managers have not been prepared to manage the huge influx of new cohorts of visitors. These influxes have left waste beside, including single-use plastics and disposable protective equipment like face masks. Technical resources are becoming increasingly available for destinations and operators on how to operate tourism amid COVID. These even include how to establish online tours and generate income from them while travellers are still at bay. The guidance is based on what we know now and is subject to change as we learn more about the virus. And certainly it's incredibly difficult to operate tourism at this time, sustainably or otherwise, when conditions and restrictions are changing so rapidly. Many countries have developed rescue packages to support the tourism sector during the crisis, and there have been international grants and technical support initiatives too. There's been an emphasis on systems that promote sustainability to make investment pandemic and climate-proof, while supporting livelihoods of people throughout the tourism value chain. However, the values of these packages, including those achieved through crowdsourcing, are small, mostly under $50,000. And the number of applications for grants by far exceeds what's available. For example, the UNDP's Lion's Share received 1,600 applications from 106 countries, but so far has just made 9 awards valued at $400,000. More robust and longer-term solutions are needed to finance conservation measures. The 30 by 30 report, led by Anthony Waldron, maps out a series of financial and economic analyses and showing the value of expanding the protected areas and its sizable beneficial impact. This makes it clear that we need longer-term, more strategic approaches to conservation financing for biodiversity. During this period, we've seen excellent partnerships and coalitions emerge, or some that have been strengthened to work on COVID responses, including these examples. The energy and drive to improve across government, private sector, and civil society make me optimistic that there is real impetus to build back better and greener. And while tourism is reflected in targets of 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals, we know from experience that it can contribute to all of them. Collective action is needed to transform tourism's contribution to the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. The EU goals for climate neutrality and environmental protection remain at the heart of recovery and long-term strategies for tourism. I hope this rapid overview sets the scene, and I look forward to hearing from all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you to Anne Spenceley for this presentation. With this background, we will now move into the live interventions with Anne Pluvinas-Nierengarten as our first speaker. Anne works as the head of the global affairs of the Directorate of European and International Affairs at the Ministry of Ecological Transition of France. Anne is a policy analyst and public policy expert, and she is one of the co-leaders of the Sustainable Tourism Program of the One Planet Network. Before we pass to Anne, I would like to remind everyone that if you have questions to the speakers, you can write them on the messaging box, which is available on the top right corner. Our technology, unfortunately, doesn't allow several active speakers at once, but we are happy to receive all questions during the messaging box. Anne, the floor is now yours. Anne, can you unmute your mic, please? It should work now. We don't hear you. It has worked earlier. Now it should work if you speak. No, we do not hear you.
Hello, Anne. Could you just check the media settings again, which you adjusted earlier, please? And it's possible a refresh may help. If you refresh, you can be back in the meeting within a few seconds. So you could refresh via the circular arrow to the left of the address bar. Thank you.
Dear participants, please bear with us. We will continue in a minute. Technology always gives us some surprises. Let's try again. And are you with us? Yes, you are. And can we hear you? No, unfortunately, we still cannot hear you. With this, maybe what we could do is to move to our presentation with Peter Haxton, if that's available for everyone. This is what I would suggest. Peter, if you are ready, we could take yours. Thank you. And we will come back to Anne after Peter. So Peter is ready. Let me just introduce Peter briefly before we give the floor to him. Peter is from the Regional Development and Tourism Division of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. Peter has specialized on tourism throughout his career, and over the past 10 years, he has worked as a policy analyst with the OECD, supporting the work of the Tourism Committee. Peter will tell us about the work that the Tourism Committee has undertaken on the impacts of COVID-19 and about managing tourism development for sustainable and inclusive growth. So Peter, the floor is now yours, and hopefully we also have your presentation available. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. It's always a pleasure to work with our colleagues at UNEP and to represent the OECD to discuss what is such an important and obviously pressing topic. If you go on to the next slide, please. It's clear that the immediate and unprecedented impacts of COVID-19 on the sector have dramatically changed the tourism policy context. OECD now expects international tourism to fall by 80% in 2020. And while domestic tourism has restarted in many countries, not all destinations or businesses have benefited equally. Indeed, the effects of the virus outbreak on tourism have been asymmetrical and highly localized within countries, with some destinations more exposed than others. As a result, the sector remains in survival mode and potentially faces a period of stop-start cycles as the sanitary situation evolves, potentially delaying recovery even further. And while the sector has already benefited massively from government supports, more targeted, agile policies are needed to support recovery in an uncertain and shifting environment. A variety of policy priorities have been identified by countries in the work that we've been doing with them. The need to restore traveller confidence, which will be a key impediment to the recovery of the sector. For example, sanitary protocols, facilitating touchless travel, and providing alternatives to quarantine periods through testing and tracing mechanisms. Others include sustaining domestic tourism in the short term and supporting a safe return to international tourism, While the pandemic has exposed long-standing structural weaknesses in the tourism economy, and many countries are viewing the crisis as an opportunity to build a more resilient sector and to fast-track the move to greener and more sustainable models of tourism development. Next slide, please. Indeed, to achieve this greener, more sustainable tourism recovery and deliver positive tourism growth for destinations, it's clear that a greater focus will need to be placed on both the environmental and socio-cultural pillars of sustainability. The desired objective is a future where tourism success is not measured in visitor numbers alone, and without considering the capacity of destinations to cope with increased tourism, but rather one that focuses on the positive impacts that tourism can provide at the destination level. A concerted and integrated effort by governments across policy areas and levels, working closely with the private sector and civil society, will also be needed to rebuild destinations. Next slide, please. One area where COVID-19 is having a significant impact in particular is in relation to tourism's current contributions to the greenhouse gas emissions. As Bruno mentioned just before, about 5%, tourism represents about 5% of total emissions, and where aviation has been estimated to account for around 40% of total emissions, followed by car transport and accommodation. With scheduled international passenger traffic expected to fall by at least 2/3 in 2020 and not expected to recover to 2019 levels until approximately 2024, there's certainly an opportunity to reflect upon the pre-COVID tourism system and consider what additional steps might be taken to reduce emissions, not just in the aviation area, but also across the sector in total to promote a more sustainable recovery. Next slide, please. With the support of the European Commission, the OECD is currently undertaking work on managing tourism development for sustainable and inclusive growth, which began prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and was originally focusing on over-tourism, but has subsequently changed focus in light of the impacts of the pandemic to focus on how destinations are recovering from the pandemic to promote more sustainable and inclusive recoveries. In addition to the need to rethink what tourism success is perceived to be, the report highlights a number of policy considerations to provide destinations with the tools to help avoid potential pitfalls of the pre-COVID-19 era. For example, it's imperative that tourism is treated as only one component of a diverse economy. Policymakers need to ensure that efforts to grow tourism are pursued within the context of wider economic development strategies and in close cooperation with industry and civil society. Policymakers should also redouble efforts to mainstream the concept of sustainability in tourism policies and industry practices to better support the transition to a green, low emissions and climate resilient tourism economy. For example, strategies and objectives should have a clear sustainability focus and clear linkages to the SDG targets, while a more comprehensive understanding of tourism value chain will help to identify opportunities for incremental improvement and capacity building needs. Adopting a circular economy approach also presents an opportunity for tourism businesses to enhance innovation and achieve resource efficiency along the entire value chain. And there is a clear role for governments to play in facilitating this process. In addition, the crisis has highlighted the shortcomings of the tourism statistics system and the need for more robust and timely tourism data that is sufficiently disaggregated and comparable to inform policy and business decision-making, including the desired type and scale of tourism appropriate for individual destinations. Next slide, please. So to sum up, despite the significant negative impacts, the crisis is providing an opportunity to rethink tourism for the future. Governments, together with the private sector, should continue to reinforce coordination mechanisms, including at the national and international level, to support tourism businesses, including SMEs, workers and destinations in the recovery phase. It's important to already consider the long-term implications of the crisis beyond impact mitigation and reopening, as measures put in place today will shape tourism for tomorrow. And recovery plans and programs should be accompanied by policies that encourage the digital, low carbon and structural transitions needed to build a stronger, more sustainable and resilient tourism economy. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. One final message here is that the latest OECD COVID note on tourism, rebuilding tourism for the future, COVID-19 policy response and recovery, is now available on the OECD website for those interested to have a closer look. And I understand that Helena has forwarded the link to all the participants today as I have been speaking. And I will hand over to Marika. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Peter, for your intervention, which gave us a deeper understanding of the impacts of COVID-19 on the policy sector, among other things. Thanks also for highlighting this need for diversity and coordinated approach for the tourism sector. This brings me to our next speaker. I would like to welcome Sergio Guerrero to talk about Portugal's vision and action on sustainable development. Sergio is the Director of Tourism Portugal, and he will tell us about how his organization is practicing sustainability and boosting innovation through digitalization. Sergio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marika. And well, first of all, I would like to thank UNEP, UNECE and OECD for inviting us to participate in this session. And actually, I think discussing sustainability at this time is wonderful, because I think for the first time that we are living a huge economic crisis like we are living these days, I think for the first time, sustainability didn't get out of the agenda immediately. So I think it's excellent news. And I was hearing Peter's presentation on this. I think it's clear that sustainability is here to stay, and those are amazing news. I don't know if I could ask to see the presentation, please. Perfect. Well, I'll try to use the next 8 minutes to actually lead you through what Portugal has been doing in terms of sustainability. And to be honest, sustainability is a DNA of our strategy since 2017, when Portugal launched the tourism strategy for 2027, and sustainability is basically the DNA of our strategy. Next slide, please. Well, for the first time in terms of sustainability, we defined in our strategy clear and objectives, both in economic, environmental, and social terms. This was, I would say, an innovation, because until now, our objectives of any strategy were to grow more and to generate more value. We went a little bit further, and we defined for each one of the three pillars concrete goals to achieve in 2027. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of economic pillar, two angles of work. The first one is to grow in terms of number of visitors, but doing it in a different way. So it's having more people to stay in the territory and not in the traditional tourism areas, and that's what explaining that we want to keep growing in terms of numbers, but also to grow in terms of value and the value generated for our economy. So basically passing from 50 million overnight stays to 80 million overnight stays with all the country, reducing both concentration and diversification of markets, and in terms of revenue, almost tripling the volume of receipts. Next slide, please. On the social pillar, basically we have two kinds of challenges. The first one is we need to improve the benefits for our community and thinking about people, and this means for the beginning to change completely the level of skills that our industry has. As I would say everywhere, skills are tourism is seen as an underskilled sector, so we need to change that. That's one of the goals. Next slide, please. And seasonality is another topic, because we see seasonality not only like an operational problem, but specifically a jobs and an employment issue, because tourism tends to be too seasonal. And what our aim here is to reduce seasonality until 33% in 2027, guaranteeing that we have tourism activity all over the year and not concentrated in peak season. And having integrated also the locals' perspective into this process, having 90% of the people satisfied with the level of development that we achieved. Next slide, please. In terms of the environment, we are also very ambitious. We want our companies to be complying with energy wasting, energy, water management, and waste management best practices. And this is an area where we've been investing significantly, as I will show up in the next slides. Next slide, please. So a little bit, we've designed the strategy, and we've took the phase, what I call the phase one of the action plan. In the phase one, first we invested significantly in less developed regions through a specific program that we call Valorizar, which is to value. Basically, we took money and investment from the most traditional regions, and we've put all the effort in less developed regions in order to create new ventures and new business opportunities. Second, we elected sustainability as a priority when defining criteria for supporting those kinds of investments, and at the same time for giving classification to our hotels. So taking this not only as I would say promotional thing, but a very concrete adoption for road mapping. Then we've designed different kinds of products, because it's not enough to put hotels or new ventures in the interior part. You need to have sustainable products that people can experience. And then we've designed one project called Portuguese Trails, which is a program fostering nature tourism and all the tours within nature. Then we've designed another one we call Portuguese Waves, which is to make surf spots in Portugal more sustainable. We've also created a specific program for pushing for accessible tourism, with a specific line of credit for that. And we've started a series of innovation programs very focused on sustainability, where we can design new products, new business models, and new solutions to accelerate the move to sustainability. Finally, a pillar on measurement. We've designed a sustainable tourism indicators platform where you can check the state of sustainability in most of the areas. And we've supported that with creating regional tourism observatories to basically deal with data and to move forward in terms of progress. Next slide, please. So we were going in a perfect direction. I can tell you that in all areas we were progressing in terms of meeting the goals of the strategy until 2027. What happened? Well, I think it happened to everyone. And first speakers gave a very clear position on this. yes, the world was temporarily closed, and for the tourism sector, we're still looking for the next years to recover back the levels of development that we have in the past, and this had implications in terms of our work. Next slide, please. So basically, we've defined first timing to responding the COVID-19 with 5 angles of work. First one, help the supporting the economy. So basically guaranteeing that after the crisis, we maintain our competitive capacity. So our companies are open and maintaining working and their competitive assets, including human resources. And this is the second pillar, that the state invested significantly in terms of measures of job protection. And in these 2 areas, we're talking about more than 2.3 billion euros of investment. The third pillar is also connected to sustainability, because we've set up a series of teams to help companies to live these times and to deal with crisis management, and basically giving them tools to know how to invest, know how to adapt, know how to take sustainable decisions right now in order to save money and be ready for the future. A fourth area, it was an area of community, and I think it's one of the biggest takeouts of this is we came together and we've challenged hotels to give rooms for free for our medical community. We've created solutions for all the community to live on and to progress on this. And the last pillar, which was marketing, and by marketing we've shifted from approach that you can't skip Portugal to another approach, which is can't skip hope. Someday we will have the opportunity to travel again, and we will remain intact for that. Next slide, please. So we've invested a lot in terms of technology. We've designed one stamp to help our sector to survive these moments and to prepare for the future. We call it Clean and Safe stamp, where we, together with the Ministry of Health, defined a series of protocols that all companies that should deliver with it. We've created applications both for city living and also for beach, where you can understand how crowded the beach was, or how crowded the supermarkets or the museums were at a certain time. And finally, we moved into digital menus and all digitizing the tourism industry as a whole. Next slide, please. Now moving to what we are right now, and actually it's news from last week. We've launched the second phase of our action plan toward sustainability. One, accelerating sustainability adoption through the different kinds of measures and through also financial incentives and land use planning strategies. The second one is a wide agenda in terms of helping the qualifications of the tourism agents, educate for sustainability and the circular economy, change with a specific approach also on plastics use. Also, in terms of training professionals to changing environment and to digital area. The third pillar is promoting sustainability as Portugal as a sustainable destination. And here, basically, we want to establish ourselves internationally as a sustainable brand. So in everything that we do, and also showcase what are the best practices in Portuguese companies and establishments towards sustainability. So enlightening the best ones, not only to promote it internationally, but also to have a demonstrated impact in the rest of the value chain. Finally, keep improving and keep monitoring the levels of sustainability of the sector. Next slide, please. So basically, this is where we are right now. Here are my contacts for any question, and I'm more than available to the discussion after this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Congratulations for that action plan for sustainable development and launching of the second phase of it. Very interesting, inspiring stuff. Also, we see some reaction at the messaging box, people finding your approach very compelling. Thanks again for all those insights. And I think now we have our speaker from the French Ministry of Ecological Transition of France available again. So I would like to invite Anne Pluvinos-Nierengarten to speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is it okay now? Great. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to UNEP, UNECE and OECD for organizing this event. I'm honored to represent today the Ministry of Ecological Transition of France. The discussion about the future of sustainable tourism in the context of the COVID-19 crisis is of paramount importance for France, both from the perspective of the most visited destination worldwide, but also from the perspective of a nation that historically places the sustainability in the heart of its policies and actions. In France, as in most destinations worldwide, the tourism sector was strongly affected by the current pandemic. The number of overnight stays decreased from 18 million in April to 700,000 in 1 year, a drop of 96%. In June, the activity restarted a little, but it remained low, 6 million overnight stays compared to almost 22 million 1 year before. To face the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, the French government launched the France Relance plan, a 100 billion euros plan to protect, support, and revitalize the economy. The goal of this plan is to build back better under 3 priorities: economy, social cohesion, and ecology. And this section dedicated to ecological transition represents 30 billion euros and targets following priorities: transport, energy renovation of buildings, circular economy with a focus on plastic pollution, biodiversity, agriculture and agroecology, and lastly, water and sanitation. The creation of a sustainable tourism fund is also part of the France Relance plan. The fund supports, via financial subsidies, innovative projects with focus on rural areas. Subsidies are conditioned to co-financing from the private sector. With regard to the assistance of the aeronautical and aviation sectors, particularly hurt by the crisis, the French government conditioned its support to the following actions: accelerate the reduction in the volume of emissions, deploy sustainable aeronautical biofuels, and renew the fleet with more energy-efficient aircrafts. On international level, France, jointly with Spain and the World Tourism Organization, is leading the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. It's a network of governments, private companies, and civil society that are working together to develop solutions to integrate sustainable consumption and production patterns in tourism operations. To promote sustainable recovery of tourism, the program issued under leadership of the World Tourism Organization the One Planet vision for the responsible recovery of the tourism sector. The vision recommends 6 lines of action to guide the development of the recovery plans. Those are public health, social inclusion, biodiversity, conservation, climate action, circular economy and governance, and finance. In addition, in line with priorities of the French government, the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program prioritized 3 areas of intervention around elimination of plastics pollution, food waste, and fight against climate change, with circularity as major enabler to tackle these issues. I would like to provide a rapid example on how the program operates to support the recovery of the sector tackling these issues. The Global Tourism Plastic Initiative, hosted under the umbrella of the program, issued in July the recommendations on hygiene and plastics. These recommendations guide tourism operators in addressing plastic pollution in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. Indeed, these past months, tourism companies reported often massive return to single-use plastic. And due to the incorrect disposal and waste management, plastic products such as gloves, masks, and hand sanitizers bottles have already been found in the natural environments of major tourism destinations. The recommendations explain how tourism operators can continue efforts of reduction of single use. They also demonstrate how safety and hygiene of reuse models can be ensured. In addition, the recommendations have a do's and don'ts section with the real-life stories on the topic of use of plastic for hygiene purposes. Within the framework of the program, the France also supports work of several UN agencies on food waste reduction in the tourism sector, with underlying idea that addressing issues of food waste and loss, and hence loss of financial resources, can improve resilience of the sector. Furthermore, the program identifies following lines of action to address food waste in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. Use of sustainable procurement as a leverage for cost reduction, adaptation of operation in and existing tools to address issues of hygiene and food security, development of innovative business models with focus on local value chains that are more resilient to shocks, integration of sustainable food value chains in recovery plans of tourism companies and authorities, and finally, development of solutions that ensure interconnection between plastic pollution, food waste, and GHG emission. On the present platform, you will find and consult useful links and resources that will provide you with additional information about national and international actions of France to support sustainable recovery of the sector. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to receiving your questions.
Thank you very much, Anne, for these examples from France and also giving us some information of the work of the One Planet Network. I would next like to speak our colleague Alina Saas, who can help us to understand a bit more about implementation of sustainability strategies and projects at the local and sub-regional levels. Alina works as the public manager of Brașov County Council in Romania. She will talk about her experience of collaboration to promote and manage sustainable tourism with stakeholders from various fields. And as a representative of the Carpathian Sustainable Tourism Platform, she's also well placed to share some examples of cross-border collaboration from the Carpathian region. Alina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marika. I hope you can all hear me well. Okay. Now the presentation is on screen as well. First of all, a great welcome to all the participants and a big thanks to the organizers. The hospitality industry in Romania, responsible for 5.6% of Romania's GDP and over 400,000 jobs, are following with concern both the evolution of SARS-CoV-2 virus pandemic and measures taken by other European countries or the own government to have similar approach. And therefore, I'm grateful for this event. The Carpathian Convention is the only multi-level governance mechanism covering the whole of the Carpathian areas, and besides the Alpine Convention, the second sub-regional treaty-based regime for the protection and sustainable development of mountain region worldwide. The Carpathian Convention provides an impetus to find solutions via joint projects, observations, studies, to arouse the interest for the Carpathian regions and people who live there. The strengthening of local economies and communities and the conservation of natural values and cultural heritage becomes essential during COVID-19 recovery. Prior COVID, in some Carpathian tourism was neither resilient nor sustainable. Historical sites were destroyed, habitats were disadvantaged. People living in UNESCO villages felt uncomfortable at home. The main challenge in realizing the vision of sustainable development of the Carpathians through the implementation of the strategy of sustainable tourism development was the lack of efficiently functioning cooperation network between institutions, the low capacity of individual actors in the process, and the lack of coordinated action on a regional level. Next slide, please. That is why in 2017, the Carpathian Sustainable Tourist Platform, with the 3 centers, Poland, Romania, and Ukraine, committed to cooperate more at harmonizing and coordinate country-specific as well as Carpathian-wide approaches in order to ensure the implementation of the Carpathian Convention Protocol on Tourism and its strategy, monitored by the Work Group on Sustainable Tourism and the Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention. The platform was expected to do what is mandatory now as well for COVID-19 recovery, and that is coordination of public institutions, universities and research institutes, private sector and NGOs. Explore how sustainable tourism can help sustainable and now resilient societies. Coordinate DMOs, data collation and online databases. Exchange of good practices, even these measures that we are sharing now for recovery, as the entire world is struggling and we can all contribute to that. Strengthening the capacity of stakeholders, businesses and destinations, upskill and reskill of players in tourism, as it was suggested during the Tourism European Convention, via online thematic series, workshops, conferences on actual topics. Next slide, please. Thus, the partnership between national governments, local administrations were created for sustainable tourism. Awareness-raising campaigns on Carpathian Convention, its protocol and strategies were organized, and national tourist task forces were created in each of the 7 Carpathian countries, along with implemented projects to implement the strategies. However, fragmentation was an issue, and the biggest difficulty remained to move level of discussions and project strategies from partner countries to local and regional strategies, and work with too many dispersed or uncorrelated projects. And the CSCP, the platform, with the Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention and the Work Group on Sustainable Tourism, should work more closely with all the NTTFs to share data, share good practices, ideas on recovery, or why not, or on already existing measures, such as Bruno mentioned, the crisis action plan that Czech Republic is developed to restart with priority sustainable tourism in the recovery period. And the setting is already there. During the upcoming COP6, the Conference of the Parties to the Carpathian Convention will take place in an online format on the 25th of November, and there a memorandum of understanding will be signed between these centers, Romania, Ukraine, and Poland, the Secretariat of the Carpathian. Next slide, please. The role of this platform, Carpathian Sustainable Tourist Platform, is to become a hub of information in online as well. Restarting the sector when a concept to work from anywhere will apply not only in lockdown, means that digitalization is a must, and the platform should extend the current database with good practices on sustainable tourism infrastructure, safety and hygiene measures, geo-referentiated data on tourism in the Carpathians. The platform should continue its work as an integrator of local, national, Carpathian level policies, measures, and solutions. And as again Bruno was mentioning, UNEP's assessment on ongoing environmental impacts on COVID-19's pandemic on the tourist sector will identify opportunities for sustainable tourism and compile case studies with innovative approaches. And the platform could be supportive in this assessment and then incorporate useful links and resources to support sustainable recovery of the Carpathian tourism. Next slide, please. Observing now the trends from June and August 2020, when tourism was more relaxed, there were more tourists in rural areas, glamping, hiking on trails, cycling in protected areas. These areas became more crowded than before. It is expected in the future to have similar behavior, and the problem will also be in, as was mentioned before, with pollution and less capacity to monitor and manage the tourism flows. Furthermore, data collection from this area will be more difficult, and if we don't have in place a proper DMO. Pandemic could be seen as a new occasion for sustainability, but if managed correctly. The strategy for sustainable tourist development of the Carpathians already sets concrete actions which needs to be implemented to overcome this crisis. The vision already encompasses 3 dimensions in line with what we need to do. It's competitiveness, conservation, and cooperation. Strategy is about rural tourism, slow tourism, heritage, ecotourism, local food, local accommodation, labeled product, trail, thematic routes, tourism experiences, hiking, cyclotourism, community, domestic, Carpathian brand, GMOs, transboundary cooperation, awareness, sustainable tourism observatory, database, code of conduct for tourists in Carpathians. Overall, the strategy emphasizes what Anne mentioned already, focus on local value chains, balancing the need of local people with the goal of conservation through careful management at local, national, and Carpathian level is one of the main pillars of sustainable tourism development. What we need to do as the platform is to identify, assess, and where applicable, remove conditions unfavorable for development of sustainable tourism. Lack of knowledge and financial resources are barriers to our sustainability. There is a need for more environmental awareness and incentives for sustainable ideas for tourist businesses. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the organizers and for inviting me to UNEP, UNECE, the OECD, and the Secretariat of the Carpathian Convention. Thank you, Marika.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you for connecting with us and sharing these experiences from your country and region, as well as emphasizing the need for coordinating across the tourism value chain and among various actors. We will now hear the last presentation for today's event before we open up for questions. As the Secretary General of the European Tourism Association, Tim Fairhurst leads the association's policy work at the European, regional, and national levels. He promotes partnerships across the region and the sector, and drawing from his extensive experience in strengthening tourism strategies, policies, and partnerships, Tim will share his insights on the importance of education for value-driven tourism, policy coherence, and intersectoral coordination. Tim, the floor is yours.
Picture should be appearing any second. Marika, thank you very much, and to all of you, thank you for a very interesting discussion from my colleagues. I know we want to leave time for questions, so I'll try and keep my intervention fairly brief, and that's made a lot easier by the fact that my colleagues have covered a lot of the central takeaways for today around coordination. Let me just say a little bit about what ETOA is, so you can take my remarks in context. I'm here as a private sector voice, so we're a trade association. We're focused on the tourism that takes place in Europe, but the businesses that bring those tourists could be anywhere in the world. Clearly, this year, the people who are based outside Europe are struggling to get into Europe, so a reset of intra-European tourism is part of the backdrop of some of the policy discussion. But hopefully I will bring with you a little bit of bring to you a little bit of private sector insight to animate the discussion a little. So I think the first thing to say is that sustainability is, of course, one of the 2 pillars of EU policy for the next several years. So that, together with digitization, will be one of the big strategic criterion for any funding at a strategic level. So just to reference back to Bruno's remarks, I think it's fantastic that there is an event that's focused on infrastructure and tourism. Anytime we try and treat tourism in isolation from a policy perspective, we will fail. That's not a revolutionary remark. Tourism is impacted by visas, by tax, by transport, by licensing, by planning control, and obviously at all different levels of regulatory competence, local, national, and EU. And of course, from the UN's perspective, the work you've been doing with your colleagues at World Health Organization, World Travel Organization to encourage more convergence of protocols around travel safety is absolutely vital. And from our perspective, that's very much part of the journey towards a more resilient ecosystem, because until we can get some sort of agreement of what is an acceptable level of risk, we're not going to see a return to travel. It's not about finding a vaccine. It may be multiple vaccines. The virus may mutate. This is about managing safely. And the travel industry is very good at coming up with solutions for that. I think the airline industry has done a lot in that respect as well to demonstrate that transmission rates on aircraft are minuscule, and what's needed to some degree is a political acceptance of risk, which is always tricky. So with that introductory remark, just a few things to say. I thought we would start by asking what good looks like, because clearly we know that from a temperature increase perspective, we want to manage within 1.5 centigrade increase. That bit's clear, and the carbon emissions reduction plans that relate to that are also clear. But the points that others were making, Peter's point about the socio-cultural aspects of sustainability, Sergio making those points also, very important that we have comparable ways of measuring those in order that we can both say, here's what good looks like, and we're making progress. This is what works, this is what doesn't. But I think it's really worth emphasizing that we're talking about an industry that is driven by discretionary spend. And I just want to say a couple of things about the B2B aspect of that as well as the consumer. And from a consumer perspective, I think the key message is we've got to make it easy to do the right thing. So if it's very complicated to work out where your holiday money is going to do more or less good, then perhaps that becomes less interesting. And I think the earlier remark I think we heard from Anna, that TripAdvisor tentatively suggests that wanting to go to more nature-based holidays is popular. I think it's arguable that millennials certainly are looking for more values-based reasons for travel. No tourist wants to go somewhere and be seen as some kind of pest who's making life worse for the people in the destination. And no one in the travel industry is in the travel industry to try and disrupt the life or the identity of the communities which welcome tourism. And I think some of the rhetoric needs to be adjusted to reflect that, because we are just people in different places. And I think one of the things the COVID crisis has done is made us all acutely aware that we ourselves can present a risk to other people. And in a way, that's an interesting reset for us, because as we contribute to the population of a place when we visit it, and as we shop there and we move around, how are we impacting other people? I think there is a heightened sensitivity to that, which is probably going to be useful as a contributory factor to coming up with solutions here. I think that's really all I've got to say in terms of overall reflections, which colleagues did not already cover, Marika. So I'm going to stop there, unless there's a particular question you'd like me to cover, and let's take some questions, because I've seen some very interesting ones come along. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, indeed, and thank you already for synthesizing some of these key questions, including what does good look like, and how do we work so that tourists can judge where their money contributes to that good. Thanks again, team. Thank you for all the speakers. And now we would like to give the voice to our audience as well. We have around 300 participants online simultaneously. As such, we cannot open more mics simply because the technology doesn't support that. As such, we have collected the questions in the messaging box, and we have about, I think, 20 minutes or so to address some of those questions. The first question I would like to address is to Peter. With the brief intro, reference to the recent IPES report that it was launched on biodiversity and pandemics by 22 leading experts from around the world. That report underlined that the causes of pandemics are the same global environmental changes that drive biodiversity loss and climate change. So, Peter, how would you comment on what would be the best strategies then to transform tourism so that it would become a sustainable and green sector that would do more good than harm for biodiversity loss and keeping within that 1.5 temperature rise that Tim also mentioned as one of the important criterion for what is good. Thank you.
Thanks, Marika. And thank you for the question from the floor. I think it's fair to say that that for the changes that we want to see, there has to be, I think, a change in perceptions of tourism at the destination level. I think local communities need to see the benefits of providing tourism that is more environmentally and socially friendly. We need to promote those two pillars of the sustainable development agenda more strongly. I think part of that is also, I think, from a policy perspective, is going to be a lot of education, trying to change the mindset that tourism success is simply getting more people in beds, and then I think it's a matter of trying to encourage communities to understand what type of tourism that they want, what type of tourism is their destination suitable for, whether it be a city or a natural environment or a culturally sensitive site. I think and as a result, it's going to require a lot more of a conversation to take place between policymakers, with industry and communities, to understand what it is that they want to get from tourism, and to understand how to best benefit not only the community but the local environment as well. I think, as I said in my presentation, this is going to require an integrated approach to policy development, not just within the tourism policy domain, but across those policy areas that are influencing tourism, whether it be environment, whether it be immigration and transport, and it's going to have to happen at a variety of different levels as well. So it's going to be policymakers, industry, and local communities, civil society, and there needs to be a lot closer dialogue to understand how to improve both the environmental and social aspects of tourism. And I think also it's key to as I said, there's not been so much success in mainstreaming sustainable policies and practices, despite a lot of effort to date, and so greater focus needs to take place there to try and make the linkages to the SDGs with long-term plans, long-term strategies, trying to find that balance between the sustainable and economic components of tourism. I'll just give one example from the COVID note that we've just published, as I said, in Mexico. And I'll read this from the report. They see the crisis as a catalyst for its Mexico is Reborn sustainable initiative, which aims to create a new generation of tourism routes to promote social well-being, harmony with nature, and integrated development approaches to create sustainable tourism destinations and encourage sustainable production and consumption throughout the tourism value chain. So I think that's a good example of how, in this instance, a country can respond to the opportunity that COVID is presenting. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Peter. Our next question would go to Anne Pluvinaz from the French Ministry, and it's concerning plastic waste. So, as everyone knows, before the pandemic crisis, many countries were already starting or were actually on a good track in reducing waste in general, and particularly plastic waste. Now, obviously, as health and safety requirements have been prioritized, what we have seen is that some countries have so strongly focused on this and actually postponed or at least delayed their commitments to implementing programs aimed at reducing plastic pollution. And how would you comment this development? How do you see the situation on perhaps sort of competing priorities, or are they competing priorities?
Thank you, Marika. Are they competing? I would tend to say no, because all actors across tourism value chain, including governments and private companies, should, on the contrary, reinforce and reaffirm their ambition in terms of reduction of plastic pollution. Many destinations will, and certainly have already, waste management infrastructure under great pressure. They will have difficulties to manage these streams of plastics. Many destinations don't even have appropriate waste management infrastructures. Without mentioning the risk of leakages of the plastic waste in the nature and our oceans. The recommendation of hygiene and plastic that I mentioned during my intervention, and that they were developed by the Global Tourism Plastic Initiative, gives realistic responses on how to continue implementing elimination strategies, ensuring reuse model, so on. Without being anti-plastics, recommendations recall that plastic isn't a mean of sanitation, that if a single-use object or packaging was in contact with a person, it also should be sanitized, just like a reusable dispenser. Also, plastic wrapping can give a false sense of security, which can be quite counterproductive and even dangerous. In the current context, there is a great danger of miscommunication. So it's of high importance to continue having clear and distinct messages when it comes to measures aiming at preventing and reducing plastic pollution.
Thank you, and thank you for giving your insights on this question. The next question is concerning the interesting strategy that Portugal has in place, and as such, I would like to ask Sergio to comment a bit more on that. We have a participant who would like to understand, how will you measure tourists' satisfaction in the strategy that you are now implementing? And the second question is from another participant, also to you, and about your plans and strategies. You presented already some of the innovation and activities targeted particularly on economic and social recovery. What about the measures related to environment? Could you elaborate a little bit more also on those?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm glad for the discussion. I think it has been quite interesting, and I've learned a lot, to be honest. Well, on your questions, I will start from the easier one and go into the more difficult. First of all, measuring local satisfaction. Basically, what we did when we've launched our strategy, we had a previous study that was undertook in Lisbon, in the capital city of Portugal, that already had a survey that they did to residents to understand how satisfied they were with the model of development. And what we did basically was to expand that concept to other parts of the country. So basically, what we want to have is in the most in the most crowded destinations, we want to understand where are we reaching the peak in terms of satisfaction with the residents, because we believe that tourism is a human activity from people to people. So it's impossible to have a good experience also not respecting or not being with the local population with us. So basically, that's what we do. What we're doing now for measuring that at local level is using the regional tourism observatories as platforms to do that, into here the sector in a long term. Well, thinking about how to put, I would say, all the environmental pillar in practice, what we've done here. Well, first of all, the ones who know me, I would say that's basically our style also in Portugal. In terms of addressing this, we have two perspectives. The first one is to be practical, and by being practical and pragmatic is what we've aimed with our strategy was to set where do we want to go as a community, as a sector for the future. And I believe that having clear objectives in each one of the areas was clear on that. And also after that, create concrete tools for having the sector doing progress in that way. In what regards to environmental areas, we've done basically everything that we could to do it. We've done webinars, conferences, seminars, innovation programs to get solutions that SMEs, that hoteliers, that travel agents, that restaurants can implement in their businesses to be more efficient in terms of managing energy, water, and waste management. We're working with other public entities to have that. We are now launching a tool that will help all companies to understand where they are in terms of sustainability progress, and specifically in the area of environment. So that's one area. We've also put it on the table several financial instruments where we majorate normal incentive schemes if people take sustainability measures. So that's one very interesting thing. We've created specific instruments to finance those kinds of implementations, also in terms of environment. And what we've done also was to connect the classification system of hotels, for example, to the level of commitment in terms of environmental. So as good as you are in terms of several criteria of environmental performance, the more points do you get for your final classification as an hotel. The last point on measuring. This is measuring sustainability, as I would say most of the people around the table know, it's far from being easy. So here, we also want to be practical. Let's measure what we can measure, and let's gather knowledge and gather people that are working on this field to help us to progress. I think that's the times we're living. We have more questions than certainties. So basically, what we want is to gather a community of people that can help us think about it, that can help us to, when we're driving. Because some of the unsustainability problems that we have are here because probably in the planning phase were not well addressed. So that's where we have to go back. That's where we have to build an ecosystem of people that understand trends, that understand human behavior, that understand environmental impacts. So we can put there in the models solutions that can actually help us to continue to grow our business at the same time as we respect environmental obligations that we have as a community. So that's my point of view on this.
Thank you, Sergio. We have time for at least one more question, and I'd like to ask Tim Fairhurst if he could share some of his views on a couple of very important but difficult points. A participant is wondering, how could we best regain the trust of tourists in using public transportation and other forms of more climate efficient traveling? Obviously, considering the safety risks now, how could the tourism sector address this question? Another one also linked to climate issues and that big question about keeping in the 1.5 temperature rise, long-haul flights, probably something that travelers are reconsidering more carefully in the past as we move forward. And as the technology on biofuels and other more climate-friendly means of taking these long-haul flights is not yet here, how would you comment on this situation?
Sure, thank you, Marika. Well, there are various ways of mitigating in addition to just doing less, and carbon offsetting, if done well with proper additionality, is part of the solution. And we need to educate ourselves about carbon finance and about discriminating between good and less good carbon offsetting schemes, but that will be part of the mix, I think. very briefly, I think it's likely that people will consider flying less but staying longer. So that will certainly be a possible, and I would imagine that product development could follow that. So the growth of a slightly slower form of tourism, maybe fewer destinations within a longer period, and a bit more immersive experiences. We may well see more of that coming from the private sector, but this is very much going to be a public sector, private sector dance. And I think the remarks we heard from Romania, from Alina, were very much underscored the need to have a collaborative approach to develop the product in that way. But in terms of restoring confidence, there is plenty of data out there, and I have no conflict of interest because we have no airlines as members, but take a look at the data that IATA and others have put together and the airlines about the risk of transmission in flying. There is plenty of good data to show that forms of collective transport can be managed very well, whether it's because of the PPE that people are employing or there's something intrinsic about the form of transport to do with filters and so forth. So a lot of that is about education and being science-led. And there is some good data out there which people should be paying close attention to. But I think the number I'd draw our attention to, we saw earlier, I think it was, could have been Anna who was presenting it, to do with the component of emissions that came from cars. One of the things we have seen this year is a growth in private travel as opposed to collective travel. It's obviously very important we restore confidence, and certainly forms of transport like coaches, which are very low emission compared to the average car and low emission compared to a lot of city transport. We've got to make sure they are part of the plan and not seen as part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Part of the plan, not part of the problem. I think that's the goal for all of us as we move forward. In terms of this webinar, we are approaching the end of it, so I will wrap it up with some very brief concluding remarks. This was, in a way, sort of a first of this type of events that we organized under the Environment for Europe process towards the ministerial conference that will take place in 2 years' time. As such, many of the discussion, the topics are a bit introductory in nature, and I'm sure participants would be very keen to hear more pragmatic and concrete examples, and I hope that is something that we can do as we will start to approach the conference in Cyprus in 2 years' time. We focus today mostly on COVID-19 pandemic, which has been only the latest, but obviously very, very powerful wake-up call about the links between environment, economy, and human well-being. It has affected us all, and it has challenged us to reconsider our way of life. But as we have heard, and as we all agree, it has also shown what we can do when we all come together. The many interesting and inspiring views, ideas, and insights that we've heard from our speakers have clearly shown that this transition to build back greener is possible if we apply principles of circularity, digitalization, innovation, and cooperation. I do believe that each actor taking part in this event today is part of the solution. Destinations, businesses, local communities, visitors, policymakers, as well as investors need to work together in a consistent and coordinated manner. The ongoing triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution requires immediate change and action. Business as usual is no longer possible. We need to harvest some of the experiences and best practices that we have achieved so far and look for the growth and value from solutions that help to preserve nature and allow tourism to thrive in the long run. Only that way we can shift the course so that also the future generations can enjoy the natural wonders that remain. It's now time for me to thank our partners, OECD and UNECE, as well as the speakers once more. Thank you also to our interpreters from the Kudo platform and our meeting operator, Ben Jordan, who has made sure everything ran smoothly today. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Let's continue to work together and make sure that sustainability, biodiversity protection, and climate action are at the core of tourism when we build back greener. Thank you and keep safe.